Students of Reddit, have you ever lost your temper with a teacher? What's your story? This happened to me in college. I was near the end of my senior year and needed to take an elective to satisfy degree requirements. I took basketball, since I love the game. The professor was an assistant coach for the school's basketball team, and he didn't give a crap about the class. Our class starts at 8 a.m. in the old basketball gym on campus, and he was the only way that we could get into the gym. A few times he had a colleague come open the gym for us, but at least 7 or 8 times over the semester, he just didn't show up at all. So after 15 minutes, the students just went back to their dorms or apartments. I was a commuter driving 45 minutes each way, so I had to skip work on the days I had class. I was working to pay for school. Near the end of the semester, someone in class asked him about his attendance. Then he makes an announcement that anyone that doesn't show up for the final exam, basically whoever could make a basket, will be failed. On the day of the final exam, he didn't show up. No colleague, nothing. On that last day, there were 30 students freezing cold sitting outside of the gym in December. During professor evaluations, I ribbed him a new one and wish I could have let him know to his face that his laziness cost me money. Edit. Okay, so some of y'all have some questions. I'll address a few here. Imagine waking up early enough in time to drive 45 minutes each way to an 8 a.m. class only to find out that your professor decided not to come in. Not once or twice, but 8 times. We all waited 15 minutes for him to show up, but he never did, so we left. I value my time, even if it's more than dollars and cents. The professor didn't value anyone else's. I don't understand when some of you say he saved me time. Would love some insight. He cost me money because the time spent driving to and from a no-show class could have been spent earning. I didn't care about getting a basketball education, but did care that he made it sound like he would fail us if we didn't show up, especially on the day of the final because he made the announcement as if he was upset he was questioned for not showing up in the past. It was as if he deliberately wanted to screw us over. What an absolute turd that guy is. Look, I loved it when my professors just kind of didn't show up and we canceled class, but threatening to fail somebody and then still not showing up is a pretty big douche move. Story 2. I flipped my crap on a logic professor who lost my assignments records. You didn't do them. I'm looking at your grades and they are zeros. That's why you have a D. Me. Look here, man. I have papers you've graded right here. They aren't even good, but they are not zeros. It was over the phone. But eventually I read through his comments on my papers while he was trying to argue with me. That's when he was like, okay, that doesn't sound made up. Scan your papers and email them in. Went from a D to a B. Baller victory. It's also kind of hilarious to be arguing with somebody and then say, no, you definitely have my papers. Yeah, they kind of suck, but you have them. And he got a B. That's better than I did. Story 3. My IT teacher wanted to inspect my work, spreadsheets or a Word document or something. Anyway, she accidentally deleted the file. I was upset and tried to point out that she just deleted my work. She started to shout at me, telling me I should have saved frequently. I shouted back, telling her that wasn't the issue. She outright deleted the file. It got pretty heated. My parents were called. We were outright yelling at each other for a good couple of minutes to the point where we were both in tears. I was about 14 at the time. She should have known better. A few years later, my sister had her when she went to that school, and that same teacher berated my sister, calling her names. What a loser. Edit. It was a long time ago and I was pretty stressed at the time. I can't remember exactly how, but after several attempts, I wasn't able to restore it. Looking back with what I know now, there are things I could have done to restore it now, even going as far as giving myself admin rights and having a poke around. But I was 14 at the time, being taught IT by a French teacher. And un de trois looks like your files have been deleted. Is that French? Kind of-ish? Whatever. Story 4. I know a chap who once lost it in a lesson and threw a chair at the teacher. Some years, like 15 or so back, and the two are now good friends. Essentially, a discussion had turned into an argument, holding up the rest of the lesson, with the chap basically being awkward and pedantic, not letting it go, getting unduly steamed up himself, and apparently not realizing that everyone was getting pretty tired. The teacher made some snide remarks and the chap flipped, threw a chair and walked out. He waited outside, though cooling off, and afterward the teacher went outside as well. Said something to the effect of, I think we both ought to apologize for what just happened. And so they did, and all was well. Story 5. A couple of weeks into my senior year of high school, the president gave a speech about the importance of school or something. I don't know. I wasn't really paying attention. Anyway, all of the teachers in my school had to set up their projectors so we could watch it. My math teacher couldn't figure out how to get her projector working. So me, being the nerdy kid, I offered to help. She had a fit. Started screaming about how she wasn't stupid and how I needed to just sit down and shut up. After a few more minutes of her failing to fix it, she pointed at me and ordered me to fix it. I said, "Fix it yourself." She told the whole class to go next door to watch the speech in that teacher's room. When we got up to leave, she pulled me to the side and told me that when the class got back, I was going to stand up and apologize for being so rude to her. I refused and went to join the rest of the class. So she spent the rest of the year making my life miserable. She told me on several occasions that she was going to make sure that I failed her class. Sure enough, I failed her class. Only class I ever failed. Edit. Since people are asking why I didn't report it, I did. My parents went to the administrators, but they didn't want to do anything and said it was an issue for the math department head. The department head was a good friend of my teacher and took her side. The class wasn't a requirement for graduation, and it was the last semester before I was done with high school, so I didn't care to waste any more time on it. Edit 2. People are also asking how she can fail me at math since the answers are either right or wrong. I would turn in homework assignments and she wouldn't get them. Students weren't allowed to keep a copy of the test because the school was worried about test compromises, so she could basically give me whatever she wanted on them and I couldn't prove anything. If there was a dispute about the test grades, the school's policy was to have the department head regrade the test. But as I mentioned, the department head was a friend of hers and found that all of the tests that I disputed were graded correctly. Whether or not that was true, I don't know since I never got to see them. Story 6. There was a high school English teacher, Miss Blades, who was ignoring me for a while. It's worth mentioning that she didn't really like me for some reason. I wasn't a bad or annoying kid. In fact, I was very non-confrontational and mostly kept to myself in and out of class, so I don't know what that was about. Anyway, I had my hand up because I had to use the bathroom and she kept pacing about the room, answering other kids' questions, but would glance at me and immediately look away. After about 5 minutes with my hand up and getting ignored, and about to crap my pants, I whistled as loud as I could. Interrupting anyone was completely out of character for me. Well, once upon a time I had chipped one of my front teeth, so I could whistle extremely loud because of it. My whistle was just that. It was the whistling equivalent of firing a gun in a closed room. Absolutely deafening. The entire room got quiet and she snapped her head around so fast. As her name might suggest, Miss Blades was staring daggers into my face. Then one kid goes, "Ooh, he just called you a dog. Oh!" Then she gained serious momentum from that one-off and said, "Oh, I don't think so. You think I'm a dog? You think I'm a dog?" I got sent to the principal's office for disrespecting an ignorant teacher. I used the bathroom on the way there. Edit. So there have been a lot of assumptions about Miss Blades. I just wanted to say that I can totally vouch for her competence as a teacher, and she was often quite fun and energetic, but she did have one heck of an attitude if you didn't follow her rules. Story 7. When I was in 8th grade, my science teacher decided the day before the last test of the year to give us an extra 16 pages of new material to learn by ourselves and appear in the test. Needless to say, everyone lost their crap and started complaining. I wrote her an angry letter. I was later forced either to apologize or they would tell my parents. I apologized because I may have been a little inappropriate. And by the end of the year, she was fired after her first year in the school. She also thought it was a good idea to bring her dogs to part of the lessons in the science lab, when there are 2 kids who are allergic to dogs. Story 8. I once flipped on my German teacher. I'm German. She obviously didn't like me and her marks were biased. This one time she gave me an F on a poetry interpretation. Grading that is ridiculous as you can just interpret it as whatever, and the mark depends on the teacher's mood. I always got an A for grammar because the lady has to give me credit where my work is quantifiably good. After handing the papers back out to the students, she did some debriefing about the whole thing, comparing what everyone wrote. She told the whole class how good my thoughts on the poem and some of the passages that I wrote were, and wanted me to read out loud what I wrote. I just said, "You gave me an F," stood up, and left. Butthole. That's brutal. To think someone did a crappy job in the first place, regardless if it was or not, give him an F and go, "You think your poem interpretations are so good, how about you read them for the class?" What a turd. Story 9. I had a Spanish teacher, and in order to gain other students' sympathy, she would make fun of one of the students and kind of bully, not that badly, but well, that student for this hour of class. Of course, other students would sometimes laugh because class was super boring, so it was like a show. I hated that. Of course, she would pick the students that didn't reply back to her provocation, the low-profile type. And of course, she would use the perfect excuse just after being mean. Oh, it's just a joke. One time she picked on the most non-confrontational guy. She takes him as an example to describe a homeless guy in a picture. After only 10 freaking long minutes, he stands up and leaves the classroom crying. And when she stops him before he leaves, he tells her his dad died the previous night and pushes her away. Once the door closed behind him, she paused for a second and takes a crying voice to repeat what he had just said. "My dad just died." Poor baby. Before I realized it, she received my Spanish book in the face, and I called her an ugly loser. Yeah, my insult level isn't great in Spanish. That is so pathetic as a teacher. Look, I get it's mostly about education and all, but kids spend like half their childhood with these people. And it's one thing to just not be a supportive adult in the room, but to just actually belittle and berate these kids to the point of crying and then mock them? That's so lame. Get the heck out of here. Story 10. I had a bout of stomach flu which was so intense that it damaged my intestines, and as a result, my body couldn't process certain foods for a while. This caused me severe pain. I mainly had cramps that were so bad I couldn't do anything useful anymore except curl up and wait for them to be over. It took me more than a month to figure out a very limited amount of safe stuff to eat, which I ended up slowly expanding on over time. I did miss a few weeks of school when it first started though. Directly after my math teacher's class, she insisted I come to her and explain why I missed so many of her classes. I had a note from my GP ready, but she dismissed it. She told me she could tell that I wasn't sick, but that I was just lazy and lying to everyone, and that she was severely disappointed in me. I literally just walked away, which is the closest I ever got to having a temper tantrum in class. In retrospect, I wish I had told her what I was really thinking, being that I was very disappointed in her. That's kind of a very weak argument to make. I mean, to be in so much severe pain that you can't come to class, and then you finally feel better that you do come to class, and they go, "Hey, why'd you miss class?" And you say, "Well, I was in a lot of pain, I was sick." And they say, "Well, you don't look sick now." That's why he's here, because he feels better. Like the guy, he has a note from his doctor, and he said he couldn't do anything but curl up and wait for the pain to be over. Unless he has a history of like actually acting out and skipping class, I mean, cut the child some slack. Story 11. When I was in high school, we had this small angry teacher that played rugby, or at least tried to, that was always belittling students to feel better about himself. One day we had physical ed and our teacher couldn't come, so the little and always moody teacher that played rugby came to replace her. Little teacher was trying to show off his skills at rugby and making our class play some game where we had to tackle whoever had the ball. We didn't tackle hard enough, so the little guy joined to tackle some students and show off his grandness. He was having fun being unstoppable and yelling at us if that was all we could do. I was kinda mad, so I just went running at full speed at him. Little teacher got tackled and hit the ground so hard. That was something our class laughed about all year. Edit. For those wondering, he used to despise and treat us like he was reaffirming his manliness, though he had some good points too and was kinda crazy. It didn't seem like a student-teacher relationship, so it wasn't that boring most of the time. I guess that's the reason why most of us still remember that little moody teacher. Does anybody remember Ricky Flame from iCarly? Basically, this guy wants to be the greatest at everything, and he sucks, so he realizes the only thing he can truly win at is wrestling in Little League. Story 12. My 8th grade math teacher. She was the absolute worst and ruined any appreciation I had for mathematics forever. She'd purposely skip chapters and mark correct answers wrong if you wrote numbers a certain way. For example, you never put that little dash at the top of your number 7s or your answer was wrong. Also pop quizzes. She had this rule where a pop quiz could cover any material out of the book even if it was something we hadn't gone over yet. And it's not like we could take the book home to study. It was one of those classes where the textbook had to be left in the classroom. I just quit doing any work for her after that. It royally upset her. Story 13. When I was a senior in high school, I had an AP English teacher that would grade people based on how much she liked them, essentially. I had long hair and stretched earlobes, and she despised me, even though I was an excellent student in all aspects. She claimed I didn't turn in assignments on time to justify my grades, so I spoke with my guidance counselor and she investigated for me. Turns out she had sorted completed assignments into piles of good and bad, and would arbitrarily grade the papers based on who she felt sucked up to her the most that day. I presented a book report on the Odyssey, which was by far the longest and most detailed presentation of the whole class, and she gave me a D. I told her, "Screw you, this is the end of your career," and walked out because I had sent an identical copy to the guidance counselor. She presented it to the school board, eventually got her fired, and the best part was, she was also the driver's ed instructor and lost her job doing that as well. Apparently I wasn't the first to speak up about her, but I was the nail in the coffin, and it felt great. Well, if it's any consolation, I gave my teacher the apples, I gave her all the sweet remarks and compliments you could ever ask for. Okay, a perfect student, but I still got horrible grades. Not because she didn't like me, but, even politeness and good manners can't overturn wrong answers. Story 14. 8th grade science class. God, I hated her. For the sake of this, let's say her name was Mrs. B. Early on in the year, Mrs. B had given us a science fair project due in January. We had several class periods over the course of those months as well to work on it. My project was creating an unbeatable tic-tac-toe program. It did work properly, but that's besides the point right now. Because it would take significantly longer to have 20 people, the amount of tests we had to do, each play 3 rounds with the thing, so I asked her if I could do fewer and she agreed, allowing me to only do 7 people, which I got done shortly before Christmas break. Only about 1.5 school weeks until the project was due. I make sure to thank her for letting me do fewer, as I would have never gotten it done in time otherwise. She turns to me with this confused look as to say something of the effect of, "I never said that. You have to do 20 trials like everyone else." I was so insanely furious, I even got a witness who overheard her give me a lower number come in as evidence. Both me and my witness ended up in detention. I did end up getting the project done, but barely, and it was rushed as heck. I still occasionally think of it, and I want to punch a wall. Story 15. Obligatory, not me, but when I was in high school, a girl absolutely lost her crap on my math teacher. The way class generally went was we'd go in and he'd have the day assignments written on the board. Then he'd spend the first 20 minutes of class teaching new concepts and going over problems. Then he'd give us about 30 minutes to work on our assignments, and he'd sit at his desk and answer questions. Overall, I really liked this style, but some did not. This girl did not. About 3/4 of the way through the year, she snapped. The class was no different than any other. He explained the new stuff and did some examples, and then said, "Anyone who needs help, just line up at my desk and I'll be happy to help." She freaking lost it. "What do you mean that's it? I don't want to wait in line for 20 minutes. Help me now. This is freaking BS. Screw you." She was getting angrier and angrier, and to my teacher's credit, the angrier she got, the calmer and quieter my teacher got. And the calmer and quieter he was, the more furious she would get. Teacher, I understand you're upset. How about we go to the hallway and talk about it? Student, no, freaking help me with this crap here and now. Teacher, now there's no need for that kind of language. We can discuss this civically. I'm happy to help you the way I can. Student, screw you! Screw this! I hate freaking school! Teacher, I'm sorry you're so frustrated. What can I do? Student, get freaking screwed! I freaking... This is when the principal walked in and took the girl out of the class. The teacher left for a moment to talk to the principal while we could hear this girl screaming gibberish all the way to the office. Just every expletive in the book, all directed at the teacher. When it was all over, the teacher calmly walked back in, stood at the front, and said, "Well, anyone else have a problem with me? I'm happy to discuss it if we can be civil." No one said a word. Okay then, anyone who needs help, come see me. Class went on like normal after that. In retrospect, that teacher handled that crap like a freaking pro in every possible way. Never saw that girl in class or in school again. So something had to have been going on to set her off like that. But I've never seen a student go off like that before or since. And I've worked as a teacher and sub for nearly a decade. Edit. Something had to be going on with that girl, but I have no backstory. I don't know if she was struggling with grades or with that class, or if that teacher said or did something to set her off I don't know about. I just know what I saw in class. I'm certain something was going on with that girl to set her off though, either at home or school. I just think that math class was her last straw for whatever reason. Yeah, I mean, she was super rude and disrespectful, especially the way I impersonated her. But, you never know what's going on with these kids. Like, clearly it's the wrong way to talk to anybody, but usually the main thing is not the main thing. Like, there's something beneath the surface. So hopefully she got some help if something was going on, and to make sure she's okay. But
you freaking mother
beloved son of a... Story 16. Yes. A long time ago in 3rd grade, we were having a math lesson and our para was helping our teacher out. I wasn't great at math at that young age, and I would ask her for help, and then she would ignore me and move on to a different student. I finally got her attention and asked her if she could please help me, and she finally said yes, and then moved on to a different student. So I got upset and slammed my fist on the desk. The whole room went silent, and I said, "I need help on my math. Can I please have some help?" The principal came down and talked to me and asked why I did that, because I got reported for being disruptive. She was really nice, and I never got sent to the principal's office before, and I told her what happened, and she gave a death glare to the para. As far as temper tantrums go, to say please multiple times is pretty respectful. Story 17. Not just at a teacher, but at an entire department. The English department at my first college was staffed by people who, by and large, were buttholes. Their idea of a writing workshop was having you email the assignment to the teacher and then making you pay at least $10 to print out enough copies for your story for the entire class. Why we couldn't just put it up on the message board somewhere, they were built into our school's online infrastructure, I don't freaking know. The teacher of this workshop also made it abundantly clear that he didn't give a flying crap about his students. I'm pretty sure he was a grad student teaching the class for credit, but he acted like a major douche and pretty clearly didn't read any of the stories beyond a basic skimming. We took quizzes on computers and he didn't give a crap if we Googled the answers, as long as we got it done before class ended. He drove one of his students to a panic attack on the last day because he had acted like such a creep to them, micromanaging one of their stories. It was bizarre. They also had this weird thing where they would gather every English major in the college into the chapel on campus every Thursday in order to have you listen to someone read from their work. It was advertised as creative writing comment time, but it literally just meant sit down, shut up, listen to someone read their works that were rejected from a literature magazine. No laptops, no phones, no books. And if you missed one session of this out of an entire semester, you failed the class. And you had to take 4 semesters of this if you wanted to pass. By the end of the first semester, I had had enough. I missed a session and the makeup assignment was just as bizarre. You had to find an audio recording of a work online, read by the author, and analyze how they read it. Like, what? It really got bad on the last day. Undergrad students were finally allowed to read, and either they didn't vet them at all, or they vetted them really poorly. Because there was a student who read a graphic depiction of an essay, and the teachers just let them. A few of the other students in the building left in disgust. I almost joined them. Needless to say, I dropped out of the English program at this college and transferred to a university whose English department isn't staffed by psychopaths. Took me an extra year to graduate. Don't care. It was better than that. Holy crap, that's so inappropriate. Like all of that. You know, I've heard some really rough stories by grad students and them teaching, but all the ones I met were great, but it sucks that some people just abuse their power and don't care and kind of go crazy. But so do regular teachers, to be fair, too. I mean, that's what all this is about, so I don't know. Story 18. My band teacher, he didn't direct crap in middle school. There was a kid in middle school who couldn't play his saxophone. I mean, not a note came out right. He got called out a lot early on, so he just started fingering the notes as best he could to avoid derision. I played drums and watched all of this happen from right behind him. The teacher either never noticed or didn't care. One day, out of the blue, he does care. He makes the kid play something on his own. Surprise! The kid can't, so he stops everyone. He makes him try it over and over and over. Maybe 15 minutes into it, making it past 3 notes, the kid starts crying. This isn't even hard, and I could probably have played this by now. It goes on for a while longer, and everyone is quiet and uncomfortable. Finally, I can't take it anymore. I say, "Hey kid, can you play that?" Shakes head no. "If we sit here the rest of the class, are you going to be able to figure it out?" Shakes his head no. "Do you promise to go home and practice and try again tomorrow?" Weak nod. "All right, good. Now leave kid alone and move on." That teacher lost his freaking mind. He starts going red, starts yelling something at me, calls me something and makes a vague threat. Something like, "Stay out of this or there will be consequences." Well, his wife had been fired from her elementary job because she had tape-tied a kid to a chair. So, what are you gonna do? Tie me to a chair? Everyone goes silent for a few seconds, and then one girl next to the teacher starts laughing her butt off. Everyone loses their minds laughing, even the kid. I realize I said it out loud about this time. As an addendum, that first girl to laugh I eventually married. Edit. Doubt all day, but this is a true story, told by my best friend at our wedding, who was another drummer. The entire reason we are together is because of that interaction. She realized I gave zero flying craps and finally realized I existed. In her defense, she was a foot taller than me when we first met. Our 20th anniversary is in January. I mean, we're all getting heavy whiplash vibes, right? Neiman, why do you suppose I hurled a chair at your head right there? Are you rushing or are you dragging? As rough as that movie was, he wasn't belittling middle school students. Story 19. We got this admin in my school who we've nicknamed the Pickinator. In my sophomore year, she was patrolling the school, freaking Dolores Umbridge style. She loves ruining kids' days and she busts kids for the most minor of things. This really annoying kid no one likes came up and snatched my backpack and ran. So I ran after him and ripped it out of his hands. Pickinator comes outside and immediately says, "You two, stop wrestling around and come with me." She escorted us to the office because apparently we were wrestling and fighting. Tried to tell her I was just getting my crap back and she wasn't having it. So I just said, "Well, got my crap back, no reason to stick around now," and went to my next class, which was starting shortly. I got called down later anyway, but my admin pretty much told me she overreacted and to just forget it happened. Pickinator hates me now. Story 20. I had a teacher at private college that enjoyed calling everybody stupid and that we were only studying there because our parents showed how much they earned. There were a lot of scholarship students, myself included, but who cares? I can't be quiet when I hear these kinds of things. So we discussed almost every class. She failed most of the class on the first course. We fought with the dean and she let us do another test with another teacher. Everybody passed. On the second course she gave us, same thing, but this time the dean said we were being dramatic. The teacher decided that there would not be a test, only a group presentation. She settled the groups. I got stuck with two lazy guys who did nothing. I did the entire paper and the presentation. Both of them got a 9A and I got a 7 C-. It was the last time I did a paperwork with the names of people who did nothing, no matter who they were. I needed a C to pass, failed because of a point. I tried to talk to the dean, but she didn't listen to me. So I had to do the course again. I could do it with another teacher, but I chose her. I was the worst student she ever had. I sat in the first row, always made a fool of her. Once I made her cry. The next year she wasn't a teacher there anymore. She made me lose my scholarship because of that grade. I do not regret it, and I would do it again with an extra bit of cruelty. Story 21. In junior high, I played lacrosse. Our indoor lax coach was one of the teachers. I was the goalie. I don't remember the circumstances that started it all, since this was like 15 plus years ago. But one night after practice, my mother confronted the coach. They had words about me in front of everyone. After that, the coach had it out for me. I showed up to one of our indoor games, ready to play. Again, the only goalie. I'm suited up and she tells me I'm not playing. I ask why. Because I called her a turd. I was so confused. I've never called her a turd, ever. And if I did, it wasn't in front of her nor in front of anyone else. I get undressed, go seek out my dad, tell him what happened. He confronts this lady. She still refuses to let me play. We leave. I'm infuriated at this woman. Then one day, during school, I'm in social studies. The teacher gets a call on the room phone and tells me I need to go down to the main office. Okay. I head down there and Coach Lady is standing outside the main office, ready to confront me. Accuses me of all these things. Wants me to apologize. I am refusing since I've never done anything. We are basically yelling in the hallway. I'm like 13, this woman is in her 30s or 40s, accusing me of lying, calling her a turd, of all these things which I've never done. I storm away without giving her the apology. A couple years later, I was on the varsity lacrosse team. We were playing at a tournament. My old junior high coach, aka the turd, was there because our varsity coach was her boyfriend. He ended up leaving partway through the tournament because he wasn't feeling well. She ended up coaching us for the remainder of the game. Our history was in the past, and she was super nice, and we got along quite well. This story is almost a good lesson in time and maturity and being like, oh, with some time, people will grow up and be a little bit more respectful and responsible, except we're talking about a 40-year-old woman. The 13-year-old was the one that was kind of being disrespected. So I don't know what to say about that. I mean, I guess even in your 40s, you still have some growing to do. So we can't rule that out. Life's just a series of lessons and growth. But, to be belittling and kind of talking down to a kid, it's a bit of a rough look for a 40-year-old. Story 22. I was a section leader in marching band. I was a junior and my section was 6 freshmen. We were having trouble getting a formation. These kids had never marched before and I kept taking to help them keep track. The director was a huge turd about it, making the entire band redo it because I was taking. He called me out, and I argued back. I told him I was doing my job as section leader, trying to make sure that my section was in line because it was tricky. He flipped his crap, I flipped my crap back, and it ended with him telling me to just go home in the middle of the day. So I went to the office and told my guidance counselor what was happening, and that I wanted to drop marching band. He got in a lot of trouble, specifically for telling me to leave campus. It turned into a whole thing. My parents and I came in for a meeting with him, the vice principal. In the end, dude almost got fired and had to go to a seminar on how to communicate better. The other band director, who taught non-marching bands, talked me into staying in marching band. Story 23. In Heidelberg, on my year abroad, my friends and I took a class that we thought would be interesting. It wasn't. The teacher was a complete cow who hated her non-German students, and as we were the only two that semester, go figure. She was okay-ish with me after learning I was part German, but awful to my friend. We missed 2 classes overall, had to return to our own universities for a little. This was agreed beforehand, so we missed 2 of her classes. Every other time we went to that class was together, so we missed the same amount. However, the woman told my friend she automatically failed her class as she missed 3, but I was fine as I'd only missed 2. We both decided to never go to her class again or sit her exam. Oddly enough, that exam never showed up on our year abroad credits, and we both passed with high marks. Story 24. I hadn't been doing well in calculus all year, but I was trying my best and just struggling. My teacher was one of the cool ones, the kind who act laid back and crack jokes and all that. I think this guy just thought I wasn't trying, and he was frustrated with me as I was with myself. One day in class, he made a sort of passive-aggressive joke at my expense. Something about, if you would just try harder. If he didn't say it in front of other students, just to me, but I was so over him thinking I wasn't trying that I got up and walked straight out into the school counselor's office. I would have been sent there anyway for walking out in class, so I decided to expedite the process. She was really kind and talked me down from being so upset. Anyway, that was on a Friday, so I didn't see my calculus teacher again until Monday. I was hoping we could just pretend it didn't happen, but no such luck. He pulled me into the hallway to talk, and truly, genuinely apologized. He offered to adjust his office hours, which didn't work for me, to give me extra help. He ended up helping me pass the class. Barely, but I still passed. I wouldn't have graduated without it. In retrospect, just talking to him more openly from the get-go probably would have been the more mature thing to do. But I was an awkward, self-doubting teenager who didn't know how to ask for help. In the end, the experience helped me improve that skill and advocate for myself. I still hate calculus, though. Don't we all, brother? Don't we all? Story 25. I went to a small high school. My graduating class was less than 50. We all knew each other and all the teachers and administrators on a personal level. I was a senior at the time. I was essentially the mom friend of the group of bullied kids. My 2 best friends had both tried to unalive themselves at that point. One of them was constantly bullied. The administration knew about this and refused to do anything. I was also the golden child of the administration. I never talked back, never acted up, and was a salutatorian. Seniors sat at the front during our school assemblies, and I sat in the very front row, middle. Near the very end of the assembly, the high school principal came on stage and started talking about bullying. They were going to start a 7-week-long program to prevent bullying. Okay, that's cool. Probably won't work, but whatever. Then she goes into a long speech about how she knows that bullying isn't a problem we currently faced and that this is only preventative. This was not sarcasm. She very clearly, truly believed this. My best friend had to go to a mental hospital because of unaliving less than 2 years ago at that point. I spent the entire assembly glaring daggers at her. At one point, she looked down at me and noticed. We maintained eye contact for a few seconds before she uncomfortably looked away. She had the golden child's disapproval, and she knew it. When the head administrator got up to finish the assembly, he too started talking about how bullying wasn't an issue. He got the same treatment and had the same reaction. I met with her later that day in her office, and as calmly as I could, laid out my complaints. She kept spouting the same BS she did earlier. Eventually, I just stormed out, which might not be an explosion, but for me then, it was pretty dramatic. I hated her. It's crazy how blind people can be to some things, or whether they are blind and they're just too uncomfortable to confront it, that they just turn a blind eye to it. And absolute props to OP for one, trying to protect and prevent and being like the golden child and student of the school, and being able to stand up to the administration and the principal and all these people, because that can't be easy as a child. And just props to protect these people, because it sounds like it was very, very severe. I mean, she knew a lot of people going through a lot of stuff. Sometimes it just helps to know that one person's in your corner, even even if it's not the people in charge, but it's always good to know you have somebody looking out for you. Story 26. Not a teacher, but one of the school admins. I did a year at a small Christian college. One of the girls on campus witnessed her father's unaliving. She had no idea what was happening. She just came home one day and her dad was standing in the backyard with a gun, and he said, "I love you, baby," and he unalived himself. Needless to say, she was traumatized. So she went and talked to the campus counselor. She had fallen into a state of shock and depression, and she was seeking help. The campus counselor broke patient-doctor confidentiality, went to the dean of the campus, and blabbed the whole thing to him. The dean then called her into his office and said, "This is a Christian school, and depression is a sin. You're expelled." So on top of losing her dad, she lost her housing, dorm room, all her friends on campus that were there to support her, and a good chunk of her progress in her degree. She was wrapping up her third year. Also, this is why Christians have such a bad name. I'm sad. Look, I'm not an expert in all theology, and no matter what the religion is, most of them talk about patience, love, caring, and support as a well-rounded kind of theme. And that right there is the complete opposite. And so many people who claim to be Christians, in quotes, are displaying zero behavior that actually follows the brand and the idea and the faith that they claim to hold so boldly. That doesn't mean you got to be perfect. You can't be, right? Whether you're Christian or Muslim or any other type of culture or religion, it doesn't matter, right? You're not going to be able to follow it perfectly. But the idea of casting somebody out because they're broken, no matter what you believe in, is genuinely heartbreaking. Story 27. Okay, maybe not the worst teacher, but definitely the strangest. Mr. Pratt. He was a substitute teacher I had in high school in the 90s. Inner city school, he was an older black dude with a loud mouth. There were a lot of butthole students, though, who always mouthed back to every teacher, which made learning difficult. Mr. Pratt had an odd choice when responding to these kids. Imagine a well-dressed, but definitely ghetto-sounding substitute who, when a student tried to act out, would pull a freaking puppet, obviously custom-made, and looked just like him, suit and all, out of his desk. He would then start berating the student via the puppet. The puppet was called Pratt Daddy, by the way. He would make the students talk to the puppet and apologize. Most didn't. They were laughing and tried to talk over Pratt Daddy, in which case Pratt Daddy, the puppet, would kick them out of the class and lock the door. Then the puppet went back into the desk drawer and Mr. Pratt continued. It was odd. Can you imagine acting out in class and a guy pulls out a puppet and makes fun of you in front of everybody, and if you don't back down, the puppet throws you out? That's got to be very hard and traumatic, but also the kids are being disrespectful, but just a hilarious concept in the idea of discipline as a teacher. Story 28. Sophomore year of high school, I'm in an advanced algebra class and not doing well. The teacher would lecture for the first half of the class and then give us the other half to work on homework. Since I wasn't doing well, I'd go to her desk a lot and ask for help on how to approach certain problems. She had this awful habit of just taking my notebook and finishing a problem and then going, "Did that help?" I was usually just polite and said, "Yeah," and walked back. One day I'm confused again, bring up my homework, and she just does the problem with no explanation of how she got there. I kind of roll my eyes and she saw. She said if I didn't want her help, then I shouldn't come up there. I just kind of blurt out, "I came to you because I was confused on how you do these. You're just showing me a completed problem and aren't actually teaching me problem solving." Story 29. I was in math class in high school and having some difficulty solving a problem on the whiteboard. It was something that I should have known, but I blanked, and she started to make fun of me and then laugh at me. Then she started to rally the other students to make fun of me. I lost my crap and flipped her desk. Then when I was walking out, I punched a hole in the wall and then just left the school and drove home. Surprisingly enough, I didn't get in any trouble because a few of the other students went to the office after I left and told them what happened. The teacher lied and said I flipped out for no reason. I'm not the type of person to do that. The teacher got suspended and I got to change to a science research class that they counted as a math class for me. Jeez, talk about finding the mean values. You get it? Because the teacher was... Okay. Story 30. Back in the 7th grade, I had a teacher who literally didn't give a crap about anything but what I was doing. Dude absolutely hated me. One day we were watching a movie, and I got called for eating candy in class. I told the man that I wasn't eating anything, that I was just playing with my pen. Dude tries to go into my pockets to see if I had anything, so I pushed him off because I was about to be felt on by no one. Dude got in my face and started demanding me to empty my pockets or he was going to call the administrator Sinisters. I told him that he didn't have to do that because I was about to leave myself, but the dude wasn't having it and stayed in my face. I remember screaming, "If you don't let me out of this class, I'm going to punch the absolute crap out of you." Long story short, he finally let me out, and I got 10 days suspension for eating a closed fruit roll-up. So I have a couple questions. One, was he actually eating candy that he got called out for on, and he just lied and said, "I'm playing with my pen"? Because, it's fine to get in trouble, but 10-day suspension for a fruit roll-up if that was the case? Egregious. And two, what is with the teacher diggling around in the students' pockets? That is so crazy messed up and crossed the line. Like, I don't even know when this happened or how far back it occurred, but geez, how did this guy not get suspended? Did nobody speak up? Did nobody in the class say, yeah, freaking Mr. Whatever started shoving his hands in Timothy's pants? That's crazy. Story 31. My freshman year in college, I had a mandatory writing class. I like writing. The professor was bad. The first day she said that all she cared about was the finished project and not the method we took to get there. It was even written in her syllabus. About 2 weeks later, we had our first writing assignment. It was to be a 5-page paper on insert whatever it was. The problem was it was due in 3 weeks, and she wanted us to turn in 3 full 5-page rough drafts before then. So my first turn-in was 3 paragraphs. She gave me an F, and I told her that everyone in there just BS'd 5 pages and that she was a hypocrite. My second turn-in was just 2 words. Screw you. She gave me an F again. So I went to the dean of students. I told him I'd take the Fs, but she couldn't lie and say the writing process was independent, and then have a mandatory rough draft. He agreed with me, had the Fs wiped, and had a meeting with the professor. I was informed that I didn't need to participate in the rough drafts the rest of the semester, but I did turn in the third one. 2 words. I win. I got an A- in that class. It's always crazy hearing stories like this of crazy teachers that are out of control and abuse their power or whatever they do, just like picking on students specifically, because I never got to experience that. And I even took a very similar class like this. I had advanced writing in college, and I passed it with flying colors, not bragging because I didn't do great, but the teacher would play country music. And as long as I knew the lyrics, she'd be like, "Oh, Tristan's my favorite. He knows all the words to Zach Brown Band." So the one teacher I had that wasn't by the books, all I had to do was, do the hootenanny, and I got an A+. Story 32. This might not seem like much of a temper, but overall I was a quiet, respectful, and non-confrontational student. On that day in 10th grade history, the students kept losing handouts and asking for extra copies from the teacher, and he was clearly sick of it. I had never asked for extras before, but someone must have packed up my handouts with theirs at the end of class because I couldn't find mine. I went to ask him for some, super meekly and apologizing. I knew he wouldn't be happy, but I was a good, non-trouble kid, so I thought such a simple thing would not be a problem. But I was wrong. I got lectured, glared at, yelled at, and refused, and I swear I must have been the last straw for him with how much he overreacted. I stared at him as coldly as I could, and I said calmly, but with some serious venom, "Thanks for nothing," and turned around and strode off. He shouted after me, seriously incredulous that I dared to speak to him so, but I didn't turn or stop. Dang, that felt good as a shy 14-year-old girl. You know what? Good for her. Not only for standing up for herself against an adult as a child, but it always means more, I think, when a respectful, well-mannered, and polite child is kind of cutting through the BS. Because then hopefully the guy can reevaluate and be like, oh, okay, she is the non-confrontational, she's quiet, she's nice, she does everything right. I must be the problem. But then again, we might be asking too much of a guy who's lashing out at students. Story 33. I was in the process of preparing for interviews to get into Oxford from quite a deprived area of the country. As my school's sole applicant, a school which had 2 or 3 students go onto Oxbridge in 40 years, one afternoon per week was dedicated to PSHE, like general citizenship stuff, which usually amounted to watching videos about road safety and the like. Instead of watching the video, I was sat in the corner teaching myself further maths, A-level, since my school cut the funding which previously provided a tutor and no one else was qualified to teach it. Obviously, I got into trouble for not watching the video and was made to stand outside the classroom. The teacher came out to tell me off, saying that I should be setting a better example. So I said, "I can't believe that you want me to watch a video on driving safely when 1, I don't drive. 2, I have seen this exact video 3 times. And 3, I am working as hard as I can to get into Oxford. This crap is why this school never gets anyone into Oxbridge. Didn't get me out of trouble, but I did get into Oxford. Story 34. I had this English teacher in grade 11 that singled me out in front of my whole class, because my short story in my ATAR exam was the worst he had seen in his teaching career in 30 years. I told him to shut up and not talk like that to me about my friends. He got up and started saying how strange it was that I was stupid and disrespectful. So I got up and said, "At least I'm not into children," and stormed out. This teacher was accused earlier on in the year for touching up students, and everyone knew he did it, but the principal didn't want the bad publicity. So yeah. Well, that's gross. And if it's true, I hope that guy got fired. Story 35. I was a senior in college taking a chemistry class because it wasn't required for my major until the end. Mind you, I'm an engineering student, so this freshman chem class is going to be a joke. The last problem on test 3 was mathematically ambiguous. I walked up during the test and told her that, and she told me, "You'll get it right." Fast forward a couple of weeks, and she counted me off 10 points for it. So I ran it past a few friends, and I went to her office, and I very calmly laid out my reasoning and a quick proof of why it was mathematically ambiguous. I was right. She said I was right, but she refused to give me the points back because that would mean that she was wrong and I was right. She took the stance of, "I have a PhD and you're an undergrad." Much cursing and anger later, and I was kicked out of her office. Story 36. The worst teacher I ever had was my shop teacher/gym teacher in high school. He would not do anything at all. I was able to smoke in shop class and in gym class as long as it was outside running laps or something. I never once heard him tell anyone about safety measures when using shop equipment. A few people got hurt and one actually lost half a thumb, but the worst thing he ever did was hire some of the grade 9 and grade 10 girls to babysit for him and his wife. He would leave his wife at the bar and go home to check on the kids, and was eventually caught screwing around with a 15-year-old girl. After a police investigation, they found a ton of homemade explicit content on his laptop of him having relations with many young girls. Last I heard, he went to jail for life. This was all in a town of less than 300 people. Oh God, I hate this. This is so gross. It's so messed up. It's so sad. Story 37. Junior year of high school, I had an English teacher who had a reputation for being a turd. Toward the end of the semester, my mom unexpectedly passed away. I spent 3 nights in the hospital with her before she died. The day before she passed, I was in a class when our teacher starts asking questions about the previous night's reading assignment. I obviously had not done the reading due to spending the previous 2 nights in the ER. So she calls on me and I clearly did not know the answer. I still remember the sinister smile that crossed her face when she said, "Looks like somebody didn't do their reading last night. Why didn't you do your homework?" At this point, I'm trying my absolute hardest to hold it together and not start bawling in front of my friends and classmates. She mistook this for me being embarrassed that I didn't do my homework. She then put both hands on my desk and sarcastically said, "Oh, what's wrong? Do you need a hug?" I finally lost it. I stood up and fighting through tears said, "I didn't do it because I was in the hospital with my dying mother. So go screw yourself, you stupid loser." I walked out and I never went back to her class. Screw you, Mrs. Roses. Story 38. I didn't quite lose my temper with the professor, but I'm sure he was embarrassed. It was a small writing class, about 20 students, and 4 to 5 of them always sat in the back and gossiped the whole time. One day, I finally got mad enough to say something. So I raised my hand and said to our soft-spoken and meek professor, "Excuse me a moment," turned around and said sternly to those kids, "I don't know about you, but I'm paying to listen to him talk, not to listen to you. You don't have to be here. Leave if you can't shut up." Turned back around, apologized to my surprised and sheepish professor for interrupting him, and made a show of paying attention while ignoring the snide remarks behind me calling me a turd. Sorry, Professor Matthews. To be fair, you should have done that a month ago. It worked though. I don't think this is bad at all. It sucks that the guy didn't control his classroom earlier, but I doubt he was embarrassed. If he was too afraid to kind of control it, I think he probably very much appreciated you having the balls to do so. Story 39. When I was in kindergarten, my first teacher, she got pregnant, so she had to take maternity leave. Then she got replaced with a substitute teacher to teach my class for the rest of the school year. She was very strict and she was not very nice. I had issues with her, but I was a very good student. quiet and to myself. One day, I asked her that I had to use the bathroom, but she refused to let me go. I really had to go, but ended up peeing on myself. I remember going to the nurse, and then they called my mom. My mom went up to the school and had a meeting with the teacher, the principal, and someone else. 2 days later, that teacher was fired. Okay, what kind of freaking military school was this teacher trying to run in kindergarten? Hey, excuse me, I have to pee. No, you don't. Story 40. An English teacher I had in high school asked the class to spend half of the class in the library finding a love poem. I chose Sonnet 130 by Shakespeare. It's not a standard love poem. It says nothing nice about the lady until the very end. She failed me on the project. The very next project was to choose a poem that described our general feelings around that time. I chose a poem from the existentialists. I don't recall exactly which one, but it was about unaliving. Again, I failed the project. I'll never forget a response after I read it aloud. Why would you choose something so awful and sad? A girl in the class said, maybe that's how she feels? She sent me to the principal's office for punishment. By the end of that year, I was in a mental hospital for attempted unaliving. I was there for 3 months. Oh, that sucks. I hope this was a long time ago. Not that it makes it any better, but at least, I feel today we're a lot more aware of depression and kind of mental states and being aware of other people's feelings. So I hope this isn't happening still, although I'm sure that it is, but I don't know. I don't know what I hope for, okay? I just hope everyone's okay. Sue me. Story 41. At high school, I threw a book at my math teacher's head. She fell backwards and slammed her head on the board. No concussion, but was stunned. Enough that I had time to grab my stuff and bolt away while screaming obscenities at her. Backstory is, my mother still is, a loser and was screwing with my math teacher's husband. Of course, the spurned woman took to heart to make me pay for it and made my life a living hell, abusing me and demeaning me in school. One day I just snapped. What saved me from being expelled was that I didn't storm out of school, but straight to the principal's office and stated that either I was going to change class or I would go around and say everything about why the teacher was treating me so badly. That would have been quite the bad thing for the school, so I was indeed transferred, but still treated like a pariah for the remaining of my year there. But all teachers and staff knew I was beaten every freaking day and didn't do a single thing. May they rot feet first in a lousy third-class retirement home. Story 42. My old English teacher. This is quite a long one, so strap in, kids. But when I started at this school, I got put into Jason's class in year 10. I was 15 years old, nothing out of the ordinary. He seemed alright at first, but I realized the bullying had followed me to this school too, and some rumor spread around class that my thighs were covered in scars, that I used to self-harm. One day, everyone is talking in class, and Jason made a joke about self-harming and glanced over at me. He said something along the lines of, "We all know who I'm talking about." I was so upset I stopped attending English until they moved me to a different class. At the start of this year, I went into year 12 and was put into his English class again. I was furious. I threatened not to attend and was met with, "You're not going to graduate if you don't do English." So I decided to see how it went. Terrible idea. Within a few weeks, I decided I was going to drop out anyway, and Jason was as much of a loser as ever. One day in English, a guy sat next to me and started to insult me. I calmly asked he leave me alone, but he didn't. After he kept talking, I stood up to move away, sitting in a different seat. He followed me, telling me not to walk away from him, and leaned down and grabbed me from behind. I don't like being touched. He had his hands on my chest and I lost my crap. I pushed him off me and screamed at him to not freaking touch me. Jason asked me to not swear in his classroom. I called him a useless piece of crap and grabbed my stuff and left. I did not go back to English. I attended school for 3 more days and never went back. Story 43. I had a French teacher in high school who was incredibly racist. I had heard about it from my older sister, but we all brushed off her concerns because she was generally dramatic about everything. He told racist jokes in class and then told the kids not to tell anyone outside the class the joke because, it was funny, but they wouldn't get it. He would give better grades to white kids who worked on the same project as non-white kids. Having had enough of it, I decided to withdraw from French as I felt I already knew the language and didn't need this BS. I took a free block instead, where I worked in the library. Other French teachers tried to talk me out of withdrawing from the program, but he argued that I wasn't very good at French anyway, and it was probably for the better. One day, one of my friends who was a visible minority came running in the library crying. I don't remember what he had said to her, but it was pretty culturally insensitive. I marched up to his classroom with her and called him out for his racism, telling him off in French. After that school year, he stopped teaching and returned to France. Let's go! Celebratory baguettes all around! Story 44. English professor made the entire class hunt down New York Times newspaper articles because she once won an award for doing that. Everyone in her class had to hunt down, cut up New York Times articles to put in our little diary entries. If you were missing even 2 of the 35 entries, you got an F on that entire grade. Doesn't matter if the other 33 entries were the best ever. You missed 2, they're all Fs. This is college English 2, by the way. 2. Computer science professor, who was the head of the computer science division in this college. I took an online course with him as the professor. After a long delay after the semester started, like 2 weeks after it should have started, he finally showed us the 2 different sites he set up. One had all our hardware questions, one had all our software questions, and we had our college email app which lets professors announce to the class new assignments or stuff like that. Well, I go through the entire class super easy, and he keeps announcing jokes to the class. I take my screenshots just in case and keep going through it all. Well, I get my final grade, an F, for apparently no reason. Well, instead of announcing a super important project that was worth over 30% of our grade, he kept announcing jokes, and I never had the ability to learn about this project that I needed to do. Got an F in that class. 3. Philosophy professor, also the head of the philosophy division in the same school. Wanted around 2 hours of work put into this essay for every hour of class time. Not too bad, but annoying. Well, snow days come, and now he wants 4 hours of essay writing to try and make up for the snow days, which is illegal where I am. Then he decided he wanted to do the final early and demanded over 6 hours of essay writing per hour of class. This would be okay if it was my only class, but I had 4 other classes and I couldn't handle the workload. Also, his midterm and final were oral exams for no reason and graded you seemingly randomly on them. He had pop test randomly too. He'd just walk in, put, "Test, what is Socrates' art preference?" and kicked you out if you took out your notebook at all. Story 45. She was a substitute teacher. It was a pre-calculus class and all of the students were work hard, get good grades kind of students. This teacher mentioned to us that she has an art degree for some reason. Didn't care at the time. Anyway, later we get to a tough problem and a student asks her for some clarification. She basically says she doesn't know. She then proceeds to tell us we won't use any of this math in our real lives. I was instantly triggered. We were the driven kids trying to go to college and the most likely to pursue higher level math in our future. That fact that she would belittle us for trying to learn this stuff just set me off. I very sarcastically said, "Oh, of course we won't use this math. We're all going to get fancy art degrees so that we can get awesome jobs as substitute teachers in classes we don't even understand." She sent me to the principal's office. I told the principal that the sub was disrespecting our desire to learn and belittling us for asking questions. Never saw her sub in our school again. That is crazy, the idea of the teacher saying that to the student. Usually that's a joke that the students make. "Oh, when are we ever going to need this? I don't want to do it." It's lame, but to the people that are actually driven and trying to work on it, it's crazy to hear a teacher kind of put that down and say, just forget about it. It's not going to matter. The closest thing to that I ever had was I went to college for musical theater and I dropped out at the end of my second semester. I had just finished all my acting classes and I was going over this plan with one of my professors. And I said, after I graduate, this degree is going to help a lot. And he said, "Not really." And I said, "What?" He said, "Yeah, it's not going to matter that much in the grand scheme of things." And I said, "Okay, peace." And I switched my degree. Story 46. Hardworking student in my class, whose effort is seldom justified by the results he receives, gets a mediocre score for his English test. English teacher goes on to insult him in front of the whole class, saying that he was probably just going to end up working in law enforcement or in the army. Since she was standing near to me when she said that, I replied, "Being an English teacher doesn't necessarily mean that you're very successful in your life either." She goes on to shift the target on me instead of her, saying how she can't stand students like me. There were some verbal exchanges. To end it off, we had a graduation exam that we had to do. GCE Cambridge O levels. I ended up getting an A for English. I still went over to thank her on my results day, but she ignored me. Oh well. Story 47. I got expelled from engineering college when I called the headmaster, also professor of business and entrepreneurship, 2, a mother-freaking fascist that should unalive himself. The man came one day in class with a collection of Spanish fascist symbology and gave us a 20-minute rant about why the Catalan people were inferior. They were separatist communist suckers and blah blah freaking blah. I couldn't stand it, so I said my mind and left class. 1 week later, I received the expulsion letter. For the record, the college was in Barcelona, Catalonia. I still hate that guy and regret not a syllable of what I said. Story 48. Haven't been a student for many years, but back in primary school, we had an abusive teacher. She was both physically and verbally abusive. I can't count the times she pulled my hair, hit me, belittled me in front of the class. My mother would confront her, but nothing would change. If anything, it would get worse. Anyway, one day I was in 5th class, so I was about 10 or 11 years old, and the class favorite copied my homework. She got top marks, while I got a fail because I cheated. I don't know why, but something inside me snapped. It was a total out-of-body experience. I found myself looking her, the teacher, straight in the eye, and in a clear, cool voice, say stop. She ignored me and continued to put me down. Again, I said stop. She ignored me again. This time I screamed, "Stop, you loser!" She heard that. That scream opened up the floodgates. Every bit of negativity I had suffered over the years came out. To be honest, I'm not sure what I said, but she never touched me again. If anything, she finally treated me with respect. It felt fantastic. Today, a lifetime later, I'm 42 now, I still feel proud I stood up for myself and won. This is like a classic standing up to the bully story and then they'll leave you alone, except it's a 10-year-old dealing with a adult teacher. So a little bit immature, very immature on the grown-up's part, but good for you. I mean, the ability to stand up is not an easy feeling to overcome in general. So round of applause. Story 49. Oh yes, art teacher, final year of secondary school. This teacher had a serious problem with favoring the naturally talented students and just letting everyone else sit around and get on with it. She then criticized whatever those students did and moved on without any attempt to, teach. It upset a lot of the students, but she was quite disliked as it was. So there were never any serious altercations. No one wanted to get mad in a class where they could just screw around and draw for an hour. Now, I'd been going through some personal problems in those final couple of years. Some bad stuff happened in my life that altered me a great deal, and in particular, my tendency to anger. I was a goody two-shoes, head-down sort of kid who never got into trouble. But by final year, a lot of rage towards the school had manifested because of how unfairly they treat us as students. One day, this teacher comes up to me when I've been sat working on a piece for 3 hours and I'm feeling okay with my progress, considering I've been out of school for months at a time. It should go without saying that I was not one of these students she fawned over, and I was chill with that. I just wanted to do as well as I could. She comes up behind me, glances over my shoulder, and says something to the effect of, "Well, that's not very good. You're not doing it right," and walks off. I lost it. I just completely blew up. I screamed at her, demanding to know what on earth she thought she was doing, saying something so hurtful and unhelpful. Where did she get off telling students that what they're doing isn't good enough without ever actually helping them once? How had she managed to get this far in her teaching career without once ever helping a student? A back and forth went on for a good 10 minutes, and my anger sloshed forth in a rage tide of fury. To add to the mental image, I was a chubby, 4'8", bespectacled white girl who'd received maybe 2 detentions during their whole schooling career. The teacher, a pale, fragile wraith of a woman, was incensed, but her voice was so quiet she couldn't match my ferocity. Eventually, she sends me out. Everyone in the class is stunned. None of the usual jeering when someone gets in trouble. On the way out, a couple of people cheered me on. Yeah, I know the whole everyone clapped, but it was more of just a few individual whoops, which felt really freaking good. At that school, when someone got into trouble, they'd have a teacher on call with a walkie-talkie who'd be wandering the halls waiting to discipline the student. I went and sat in the stairwell and sobbed for a good 20 minutes. Anxiety was screaming through every pore. You know the feeling. But I was incredibly lucky that the teacher on call was my dry as heck, cynical science teacher. His eyebrows shot up when he saw me crumpled in the stairwell, and he sat down next to me while I had a further good cry. He asked me what the heck had happened. Through my angry tears, I explained the whole situation, and I am still so grateful for his response. Yeah, she's a turd. You did good. I kid you not, that teacher stayed with me for the next hour, just letting me vent. I think he might have been aware of my home situation, or at least saw there was a legitimate problem, as I lost my rag so completely. Having validation from an authority figure confirming that it's okay to question that authority when it's not doing its job helped immensely. Long story short, GCSEs went wonderfully, but I walked out on my last day of proper schooling as another teacher decided to start screaming at me for forgetting a file on the way to an English class. Because of my science teacher, I finally understood that you don't need to take crap from people who are using their power to treat you in a way that hurts. You are as deserving as respect as they are, and they need to earn it first. This one might be taking the case for the most beautiful Reddit story of the day. I mean, look at that. The cynical science teacher of all people is the one who sits down. He doesn't get insecure or embarrassed like all the other teachers. He just sits and he listens. And sometimes that's all it takes. Just understand that the kid is coming from a place of hurt and pain and pay attention. And, OP kind of wrapped this whole thing up perfect. Everybody is just as deserving of respect as everyone else. I love that. It makes me want to be a chubby 4'8" white girl. Well, maybe not, but you get my point. Story 50. I saw it happen once and did it once. The time I saw it, it was in college algebra, a required course for every major. The professor teaching it treated everyone as if we should all be the quality of math majors. He'd ask people questions during class. If they didn't know, he'd ride them and embarrass them. One day, he even made a girl cry. A few weeks after this, he was doing the usual to a male student. Male student had enough and began screaming at him and creating for him a new butthole. Several students chimed in and made it the rest of the year rather awkward, but I'm glad they did it. The time I did it, I had a class where she gave random pop quizzes to enforce attendance. The quizzes counted for no points, but if you missed a certain percentage, you dropped a letter grade. At this point, I should have been getting an A+ due to extra credit. Instead, I had a C due to attendance. One day she canceled class. During the next class, she mentioned that while she easily could have made it in, she didn't feel like it because it was lightly snowing. I raised my hand and pointed out her hypocrisy. She didn't say much, but she did reverse the policy. Oh my gosh, I forgot all about that. That really was a thing in college, like how strict attendance was. If you started missing classes, your grade was dropping fast. I'm not endorsing lying, but every time I overslept or missed a class for any reason, I immediately emailed the teacher and said I got into a car accident. It was never true, but I was probably known as a very bad driver because I missed about 7 to 12. Story 51. In high school, I answered every question on an Algebra 2 exam correctly, but got a 90%. I went through the test and there was not a single marking of a wrong answer. So I asked the teacher why I had lost 10%, and he told me that because I used a pen, there was 10% taken off. I lost it. I must have spent 5 minutes trying to tell him how a test should be solely about my ability to demonstrate my understanding of the material, which I clearly grasped very well. And his final argument was that in college, I would never get away with taking a test in pen. 2 years later, I came back with my Calculus 3 exam, which I had taken in pen, and let him take a look at my fat 100%. I don't get the whole 10% off for using a pen. If anything, you got to be way more confident in your understanding of the material to use pen. There's no erasing, there's no backtracking where you fill in B and then you read it again. You go, oh my gosh, I forgot. It is A, If you use pen, you're a confident mother dog. And more power to you. So I don't think you should be losing 10%. If anything, you should be gaining it. Story 52. When I was in 7th grade, there was an old English teacher who really shouldn't have been working with kids. Sitting in her class was like hell because everyone was walking on eggshells to not be the one that she would target out for harassment that day. I would say she was in her mid to late 60s, and the best way I could describe it is that she was just fully miserable and took it out on her students. One day I did something to upset her. Not really sure what it was, but ultimately I was a good student and never really did anything intentionally to upset the teachers. While I can't remember exactly what it was, probably because it was quite insignificant, I do remember the way she proceeded to treat me. She walked around handing out an assignment, and when she got to me, she just looked at me and gave me an evil smile and kept walking. Knowing I would take a 0 for this paper, I raised my hand and said, "Excuse me? I didn't get a paper." To which she replied, "Don't talk to me." I told her I needed a paper to do my work, and again she responded the same. I went off, telling her that it was extremely unprofessional of her to tell a student not to talk to her and to prevent him from learning. I told her she was disgraceful and that I was going to the principal. I walked out and marched right down to the office where I told the principal, who spoke with my mom, and she came down right away to formally file a complaint. Apparently, this wasn't the first complaint against this teacher, but since she had been tenured, it was basically impossible to terminate her. She resigned at the end of the year, though, and I'm assuming it was somewhat of a forced resignation, but either way, good riddance. Story 53. I once had a very terrible history teacher. This guy was something else. He was horrible to everyone and said some extremely questionable things. He never bothered me in particular too much. Few things here and there, but nothing super bad. Well, my best friend drowned while canoeing with some other friends. A few days later, the principal had a moment of silence for him, and this teacher said, "Kid deserved it." And I lost my freaking mind. I started yelling at him, and I was crying, and he was just standing there with this smirk on his face. My friends pulled me out of the room while he called the principal. I ended up suspended, but there was a walkout the next day due to my suspension. Oh, that's so disturbing. That makes me mad. I can feel it, and I can just picture this guy's face, and you just want to, throw stuff at him. Sorry, I'm not really good at getting violent, but I would throw some good stuff. Story 54. When I was a sophomore in college, I was in a political science class that assigned us to write about the political history of China. Luckily for me, I was also in a History of China class and got to reuse a large paper with a few revisions I had already written. When we received our grades, I got a D, with the justification being that my conclusions were wrong. This shocked me a great deal as I had been praised for the conclusions I drew on this paper in my other class. I went up to my TA that graded the paper and protested. Said TA immediately shut me down and sent me packing. This is when I lost my temper. I arranged a meeting with my History of China teacher, HC, who agreed to look over my paper, probably because of how frantic I was when I spoke to him after class. HC then sent an email to the TA and the professor of the political science class. A meeting was set and we all gathered to discuss the paper. After hearing my account and the TA's account, the professor asked us to leave the room. We sat out in the hall, refusing to look at each other. It was the most awkward 5 minutes of my life. The TA is called into the room, and HC walks out and asks me to follow him. He informs me that I am getting a B+ on the paper and I am being removed from TA's purview. Story 55. In my freshman year of high school, a teacher wouldn't let me leave to the ER. While peeing in the bathroom, it started burning, and I saw that I was peeing out blood instead of regular urine. So I called my mom and told her what happened, and she told me she'll come pick me up from school and take me to the hospital. After all that happened, I went back to class. My teacher complained that I was late to class and told me to sit down. When my mom was waiting outside for me, I told the teacher I had to leave and that it was an emergency. The teacher told me to sit down as I was already late to his class and that I can't leave. I kept on insisting that I had to leave and there's a problem I have to deal with, but he wouldn't listen. So I got fed up with him and just straight up walked out of his class. He called out to me and asked me where I thought I was going, and also asked if I wanted to continue learning in his class. I told him I'm going to the hospital and that everything I learned in his class was self-taught and that he was a useless freaking teacher. When I reached the hospital, they kept me there for an entire week and ended up diagnosing me with kidney stones. They told me I had to go through an operation to remove them as they were too large to remove through other means. Yeah, that feels borderline illegal, I get it's respect the classroom, respect my teacher authority, but if someone's like, hey, I need to go to the hospital, this isn't a simple, can I go eat a snack? I don't even know. You can't even refuse someone to go to the bathroom, let alone the freaking hospital. And kidney stones are no joke. I knew someone who just had one recently, and he said when he passed it, he freaking passed out, fell flat on his back on the hospital room floor. Crazy. Bit graphic, sorry, but just saying, it's serious business. Story 56. This one time I was writing an MCQ test for chemistry in a pretty big hall with about 60 other students. I was writing the test sincerely, but some of the kids behind me were cheating and passing answers. Meanwhile, I was trying to understand the questions and I read the questions to myself with slight lip movements. The professor, who was a really shouty woman, comes up to me and accused me of passing the answers to the guys next to me. Me being the quiet and calm guy, tried to make her understand that I didn't cheat or help to cheat in the exam and that the voices that she heard were from the backbenchers. She suddenly starts to announce to the entire class that I was a cheater and some other stuff. I lost it and shouted at her and stared her right in the eye. I continued to write the exam, but I wasn't able to concentrate on any of the questions or answer it correctly, all because of that one butthole teacher. Story 57. As a mature age student taking on a second degree, I ran into an external lecturer who treated my class like we were 15-year-old children. The youngest in my class was 20 at the time, but has more maturity than I tend to have. Whatever. The external lecturer is a pretty big name in the local industry, so I sucked it up as best I could no matter what condescending rule or lecture she threw at me. The first time I lost my cool was when I made a soft joke to my classmate and she laid into my classmate for somehow inciting the joke even though I had been fully responsible for the interaction. My classmate hadn't even responded to me. I tried to point this out and the external lecturer brushed me off saying, "It's done. We're moving on." The second time I lost my cool was a few days before our final. External lecturer had been making us practice drills a very specific way in our classroom and was very particular about the specificity. We then moved into the actual venue for final drills and all of us were screwing up one way or the other because we were all stressed out of our minds trying to recalibrate to the new venue while the external lecturer berated us on every little thing we changed that was not to her liking. Finally, she stopped me in the middle of the drill and asked me very sarcastically why I chose to do what I did. And I answered, "That's how we practiced it in the classroom. And I apologize that I cannot read your mind on how you would like to adjust it, but I am doing my best." Silence for an eternity. She moved on to berate another classmate for another adjustment. And then finally she came back to me and said, "Don't you dare say things like you can't read my mind. Just do your work and actually try." I stood up taller and said I was trying very hard. That's what we all were doing, and it was very difficult to adjust to the venue to her liking without some guideline. And would she like to provide us with one? She told me to get out. I burned that bridge real good.